Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and to today's video where I'm just going to be talking to you about my process and everything that I did for this blue fronted Amazon parrot here. So this piece was actually drawn in collaboration with Derwent, so they sent me the Derwent Chromaflow pencils to try out, and this was a sponsored post for Instagram. So this particular video isn't a sponsored video, it's just kind of putting together footage that I recorded of the sponsored Instagram post, if that makes sense. However, I am going to leave a link for the Derwent Chromaflow pencils, 20% off and free shipping until the 31st of July in the description below. So if you want to check those out, there's a link in the description, which is sponsored, but this particular video isn't sponsored itself. I hope that makes sense. So I decided when I got this collaboration in my inbox and got the brief, one of the first things that came to mind for me were bright coloured birds. So I did a little bit of research, tried to find some references that I could use as well for bright coloured birds, and one of the ones I settled on was this one, which was from Wildlife Reference Photos. And then I also had the choice of a pair of Electus parrots, which are like purple and pink, and then their tails kind of go into like orange and yellow. So I was really torn between the two, but I've never drawn anything green in bird form, and I've always been like pulled towards the rainbow lorikeets and those types of birds, and I was like, I'm going to give myself a little bit of a challenge, and I'm going to draw something that is entirely green. I know there's like hints of yellow and blue in here, and it's called a blue-fronted Amazon parrot, but the bird itself, primarily, let's face it, when we get into the video, it will be a lot more green. So I wanted to give myself that little bit of a challenge, and I also really loved the way that the colours blended with each other on this particular reference photo, and I wanted to really kind of convey that the Chromaflow pencils are able to blend and merge and create really, really lovely colour situations. And amazingly, I didn't expect that they wouldn't, but the Derwent Chromaflow pencils, they performed really well for this particular challenge, and I was really, really pleased with that. So let's get into a little bit of the kind of feather approach that I took here. You can kind of see what I'm doing with the green feathers on the head. So what I did primarily for the face and everything was put down some really light layers. The Chromaflow range is really fortunate to have some really nice light greens and light blues. They're not pastel, but they're like almost pastel, if that makes sense. So I kind of put down like a light layer on the areas around the face, and then gradually got darker, and then used like dark blues and dark greens to add in some of the details. But for the rest of the feathers, as you can see here, I've added in a dark colour first, like mapped out all of those scallop shapes, and I've used a dark, like a bottle green. I don't really know the names of the colours because I've only ever used them for this particular drawing, but it was like a dark bottle-y kind of green. So I used that to map out all of the shapes and where everything was sitting, and once I was happy with that, then it's time to go in with your lighter colours. So you can see I've used like a really light green chartreuse kind of tone, and then also a little bit of like a light turquoise, and I've put those down as base layers. And I'm also working feather by feather, so working small section at a time. I always find this the best way when adding in scalloped feathers like this, because I get lost completely when I'm working on these particular types of feathers, and I have no idea where I'm going. I often have to have Photoshop open, and I have to use the paintbrush tool to like mark down each feather that I've drawn in. That's a small tip for you if you get lost in your reference photos, or print out a reference photo and kind of scribble it off once you've worked on it. But I like to do it this way, and I'm working left to right as well, because obviously I'm right-handed and I didn't want to smudge any of those darker colours and kind of make it look a little bit muddy. But once I've got the base layers in on each individual scallop, then I'm going in and adding in the shadows. So I'm using a dark indigo kind of colour, I don't know if it's called that in this particular set, and a dark green as well. And when I'm creating the scallop, you can see on some of the feathers they create like a W shape. So you've got a W, and then you've got a scallop that sits underneath in the middle of that W. And at the top, where that middle W meets, That's where I'm adding in a lot of shading, and then I'm kind of blending it out around each of the kind of W, like, rounded parts. I don't know what they're called, I don't know what the technical terms of a W is called, but around those rounded parts, and just adding a little bit more shading and making sure that I'm kind of graduating it down from the middle of that W as well. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that that has kind of given you an audible explanation as well as visually seeing it on the parrot as well. Yeah, then I've just continued shading each individual scallop, and then eventually, at first, when you're working on scallop feathers like this and you start adding them in, you kind of look at it and you think, oh, this is going to end up a little bit rubbish, what am I doing? But the more you work on it, the more feathers you add in, and then the more shading you do, because I often find that when I'm working on scallops, I shade like the first couple, and then I add in a couple more, and then I go back to the first ones and add a little bit more shading, so they all sit really nicely with each other. So I'm like constantly evaluating previous scallops that I've drawn to make sure that they sit well with newer scallops that I've drawn, if that makes sense. One thing I will mention is that I used the Derwent blender pen for this particular drawing because these pencils work incredibly well with a solvent blender, and they got so much more vibrant and really erased the paper white, which was essential for this particular feather patterning, because I don't know if you're familiar with scalloped feathers at all, but they often appear like very smooth, very shiny. They've got like a really nice soft subtle sheen over them, and they just look really, really smooth. And often with my particular style of coloured pencil drawing, I like to leave the paper white a little bit because I just feel like it gives the portrait a little something. In the case of something furry, it just adds to the texture. But in this case, I wanted to eradicate all of that paper white. So the blender pen, working over all of those layers that I've built within the scallops, just melted all of the pencil into the paper and created a really nice smooth look to the feathers, which was absolutely perfect. And it worked incredibly well, and I think the outcome of the feathers is actually really, really good. So when I had blended the initial kind of base layers, I suppose you would call them, for the feathers, I then went in with some more darker pencils for the shadows and added in like little bits of detail. So some of the feathers were a little bit kind of serrated on the edges, and they weren't like perfect U's of a scallop. They were a little bit torn, a little bit jaggedy, so I just used some of the darker pencils to kind of add in some of those little details, and it worked perfectly because with the Chromaflow pencils you can get a really nice sharp point. They're good for using for details, and they're also good for blending and building up those layers. So as I say, they kind of are a little bit of a mix between the Colour Soft. If you're familiar with Derwent range at all, there's the Colour Soft, which are really, really creamy, and there's also Inkten pencils, which are quite hard and they're good for detail. So I find that these are a perfect blend between the two, and it was really nice to work with them actually and create this piece. And I was really, really happy with the outcome of this, because when I was working on this, I just had Netflix on in the background, nice and chill, just really kind of vibing with this piece. And I think you can really see that in this piece, that I think that it's one of my better pieces that I've created this year. Not that I've created many pieces this year, but for the pieces that I have created, I am really, really happy with this. And I haven't been very happy with my work for the longest time, and I was really grateful for this collaboration actually, because I had the chance to work with Derwent, who I admire and I use their products and I've wanted to work with for the longest time. I've worked with them, and I've kind of got a little bit of a love for drawing whilst doing this particular piece, so it was kind of really, really nice to work on for me. And yeah, I cannot thank Derwent enough for giving me the opportunity, and I really hope that you guys like the finished parrot, because I really do love him, and I think he's perfect, and I think the pencils worked really nicely for this particular project, and I'm glad that I chose this parrot, this reference. Everything just worked really good. But anyway, I will do a review of the Derwent Chromaflow pencils. If you want me to, leave me a comment in the comment section below. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to check out that link. Again, it's not a sponsored video, but if you could check out the link if you want 20% off, if you like this parrot, that would be fantastic. But yeah, I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye!